Clara Mitchell thought she had found the love of her life in James Johnson, a disabled war veteran who seemed to understand her in ways no one else did. But on their wedding day, as they exchanged vows in front of friends and family, Clara would uncover a shocking truth that would unravel everything she believed about their relationship, a truth that would change her life forever. Clara Mitchell had always been the type of person who dedicated herself to helping others. A 32-year-old community organizer from Atlanta, she spent her days working on various social justice initiatives, empowering underserved neighborhoods, and volunteering for causes that were close to her heart. Despite her passion for helping others, Clara's personal life was a different story. After several failed relationships, she had built walls around her heart. She had been burned in the past, often feeling like she gave too much of herself, only to be left disappointed. Trust was hard for Clara, and love seemed like a distant concept. That was until she met James Johnson. It was a chilly autumn evening when they crossed paths at a charity gala organized by a mutual friend. Clara, dressed in a sleek black gown, was mingling with fellow activists when she noticed him. James was seated in a wheelchair near the back of the room, his dark eyes scanning the crowd. There was an undeniable magnetism to him. He wasn't like the other men at the event. James had a quiet confidence about him that made him stand out, even in a room full of accomplished people. Curious, Clara made her way over to him. He was an unlikely figure in the world of activism. A 34-year-old disabled veteran with a spinal injury that left him reliant on a wheelchair, he seemed far removed from the usual faces she encountered in her work. But when Clara introduced herself, James's smile was warm and genuine. Their conversation started with the usual pleasantries, but it quickly turned into something deeper. Clara found herself intrigued by James's stories about his time in the military. His experiences and the challenges he faced were eye-opening, and yet it was his resilience and positive attitude that truly captivated her. Over the next few months, their relationship blossomed. Despite his disability, James was fiercely independent and had a certain strength that Clara admired. He had worked hard to build a life for himself after his injury, using his experiences to help other veterans adjust to their own challenges. There was something deeply moving about his ability to turn adversity into motivation, and it made Clara feel like she was finally getting to know someone who understood her in ways others hadn't. The more time they spent together, the more Clara found herself falling for James. She admired his strength, not just physically, but emotionally. He seemed to have an endless supply of compassion, and his vulnerability was something Clara had never experienced before in a man. It felt different than her past relationships. This one seemed real, grounded, and genuine. James, on the other hand, was drawn to Clara's energy and kindness. He saw in her a woman who wasn't just focused on herself, but on making a difference in the world. Her ability to empathize with others, to listen deeply, and to act with intention was something he had never encountered. Their shared passion for helping others made them an even stronger match, and they quickly became inseparable. By the time James proposed, the relationship had grown so deep that Clara didn't hesitate to say yes. To her, this was it, the kind of love she had always dreamed of. James had been nothing but supportive, and together they made a perfect team. Friends and family were thrilled for them, and Clara couldn't imagine a future without him. He was her partner, her equal, and the person she trusted the most. What Clara didn't know, however, was that James had been hiding something from her, something that would change everything. As Clara's wedding day drew closer, excitement and anticipation filled the air. She had always dreamed of a simple yet beautiful celebration, but nothing could have prepared her for the whirlwind of emotions that came with preparing for the big day. The couple had worked together to plan every detail, from selecting the venue, a charming historic building in downtown Atlanta, to choosing the perfect flowers that would add a touch of elegance to the ceremony. It was a day meant to celebrate love, unity, and the future they would build together. James had been fully involved in the wedding planning despite his disability. He wasn't the type to sit back and let others handle everything. He had a clear vision of what he wanted, and Clara loved that about him. He was determined to ensure the day reflected both their personalities. They chose a neutral color palette for the wedding, with soft creams, blush pinks, and gold accents. James even insisted on having a jazz band at the reception, as music was an integral part of his life. Clara admired his enthusiasm. It made her feel like their marriage was truly a partnership, one where both voices were heard and respected. The days leading up to the wedding were a blur of final touches and fittings. Clara had to juggle her work responsibilities, her social life, and the last-minute arrangements for the wedding. She was a bit overwhelmed, but also couldn't wait to walk down the aisle toward James, the man she loved. His wheelchair was no longer something that defined him in her eyes. It was simply a part of his life, not the essence of who he was. They had discussed their future in great detail, from starting a family to their shared vision of working together in the community. Everything seemed to align perfectly, and Clara felt a deep sense of peace, knowing she had found her soulmate. The wedding day arrived, and Clara was overwhelmed with joy and nerves. The venue was decorated beautifully, and her bridesmaids looked stunning in their soft pink dresses. James, with the help of his brother, wore a sleek black suit tailored perfectly to fit his frame, his wheelchair seamlessly integrated into the ensemble. He looked handsome, dignified, and full of love as he waited at the altar. Clara, in her ivory gown, couldn't help but smile as she walked down the aisle. Her heart raced as she caught sight of James, waiting for her with open arms. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment it felt like time had stopped. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Vows were exchanged, rings placed, and promises made. Clara knew that this moment was the culmination of everything they had worked for. They were starting a new chapter of their lives together, and she felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. As they shared their first kiss as husband and wife, Clara couldn't help but think about the future that lay ahead of them. She envisioned quiet evenings at home, weekends spent volunteering together, and a lifetime of supporting each other through the ups and downs. It felt like a dream come true. Nothing could ruin this day. But as the night went on, there was something off about James. He was quieter than usual, and while he smiled, his eyes seemed distant, as though there was something heavy on his mind. Clara brushed it off at first. He had always been a bit reserved, especially in large crowds. But when it was time for their first dance, she noticed a tension in his posture that wasn't there before. Something was bothering him, but she couldn't place it. Despite the celebration around them, dancing, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, James seemed lost in thought. Clara asked if he was okay, but he just gave her a reassuring smile, telling her everything was fine. She believed him, but the unease she felt deep down wouldn't go away. There was something he wasn't telling her, something hidden beneath the surface of his calm exterior. As the night wore on, Clara's excitement for the wedding day started to fade into confusion. Why had James been so distant? Why hadn't he been as present as she expected him to be on such an important day? The questions gnawed at her, and she began to wonder if something was wrong. Little did she know, the truth was about to unravel in a way that would change everything. The evening continued to unfold with all the elegance and joy Clara had envisioned, but a strange feeling lingered in the back of her mind. The bright chatter of their guests, the music and the laughter of family and friends filled the air, but Clara couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. She glanced over at James several times throughout the night, but he seemed preoccupied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. There was a tension in his posture, and his usual warmth was overshadowed by an unspoken weight. Clara had always prided herself on being attuned to the people she loved, so this change in James's demeanor didn't go unnoticed. She wondered if it was simply the stress of the day catching up with him. After all, a wedding was an emotional roller coaster for anyone, especially for someone like James, who had been so deeply involved in the planning. But as the evening wore on and the first dance came and went, she couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Around the time the cake was being served and the guests began to mingle, James quietly asked if they could step away from the festivities for a moment. His voice was calm, but there was something in it, a subtle urgency that Clara hadn't heard before. A knot tightened in her stomach. She nodded and followed him out of the reception hall, through a side door that led to a small, private garden behind the venue. The cool night air hit Clara's face as they stepped into the quiet space, a sharp contrast to the lively celebration they had just left behind. James wheeled himself over to a bench under a large oak tree and motioned for Clara to sit beside him. Clara hesitated, but complied, her heart pounding in her chest. It was clear something was weighing heavily on him, and she couldn't ignore the instinct telling her that this conversation would change everything. "Clara, there's something I need to tell you," James began, his voice barely above a whisper. His usual confidence had vanished, replaced by an almost palpable sense of discomfort. "I've been keeping something from you, and I need to be honest with you now, especially on a day like today." Clara felt a chill run down her spine. The words felt like an ominous prelude to something she wasn't ready to hear, but she nodded, urging him to continue. She squeezed his hand, trying to reassure him that whatever it was, they could work through it together. They had always talked about everything, the good, the bad, the difficult, but Clara couldn't imagine what could be so urgent that it needed to be revealed now, of all times. James's eyes avoided hers, and he stared down at his lap, his hand shaking slightly as they rested on his wheelchair's armrests. He took a deep breath, gathering the courage to say what had been eating at him for months. "The man you've married." "He's not who you think he is," James said, his words coming out in a rush. He looked up at Clara then, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and pain. "I'm not a disabled war veteran, Clara. I've lied to you, and I've lied to everyone. I've been pretending for years." Clara's breath caught in her throat. The words felt like a slap, a brutal shock that she wasn't prepared for. The world around her seemed to stop for a moment as she processed what James was saying. Everything she had believed, everything she had known about him, was being stripped away before her eyes. "I'm not a veteran, Clara. I wasn't injured in combat. My disability is—" "It's not what I told you," James continued, his voice barely audible now. "I made up the whole story. I've been using the sympathy and support from people like you to get by. I've taken advantage of your kindness, your trust, and I'm so sorry." Clara sat frozen, the weight of his confession sinking in. The life she had built in her mind, this fairy tale romance, this man who had become her everything, was now shattered. The room spun, and for a moment she wasn't sure if she had heard him right. Had James really been living a lie all this time? Was this really the man she had married? The man who had promised to love and support her through anything? Her mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. It didn't seem possible. James had been so open with her, so vulnerable. They had shared their dreams, their fears, and their plans for the future. How could he have fabricated something so important? How could he have lied about something so fundamental to his identity? But as the silence stretched between them, Clara realized there was more to this story. James's eyes were filled with regret, and she could see that his confession wasn't just about the lie. It was about something much deeper, something that had been festering beneath the surface for years. He wasn't just apologizing for the lie. He was apologizing for the manipulation, the trust he had broken, and the impact of his deception on the life they had started to build together. Clara felt a wave of emotions crash over her. Anger, confusion, heartbreak. But most of all, she felt betrayed. She had trusted James with her heart, and now, on what should have been the happiest day of her life, that trust had been shattered. The weight of James's confession hung heavy in the air, like a suffocating cloud. Clara's mind reeled, trying to process the reality of what had just been laid bare. She had always considered herself a good judge of character, someone who could see through deception and read between the lines. Yet in this case, she had been completely blind. Her marriage, the one she thought was built on trust, had been based on a lie. She felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her, and she was falling, unsure of where she would land. James's voice trembled as he continued, but his words were almost drowned out by the chaos that was unfolding in Clara's mind. "Clara, I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to deceive you this way, but I couldn't stop. I've been living this lie for so long, and I couldn't find a way out. I don't know what to say. I don't even know how to fix it." Clara's chest tightened as she listened, the tears she had been holding back threatening to spill over. Every word from James seemed to drive a deeper wedge between them, and the more he spoke, the more the realization settled in. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was not who he had claimed to be. The story he had woven for so long was a carefully constructed facade designed to manipulate her, to make her feel sorry for him, to make her fall in love with someone who didn't exist. "I wasn't a war veteran," James continued, almost pleading now. "I didn't serve in combat. My injury, it wasn't caused by any act of heroism. I wasn't in the military at all. It's all been a lie. I've been playing this role, acting the part for years, and I just don't know how to make it right." Clara shook her head, her thoughts racing. The anger she had suppressed was beginning to rise to the surface, bubbling just beneath the sadness and betrayal. How had he kept this from her for so long? How had she, someone who prided herself on being able to read people and spot deception, fallen for something so calculated and cruel? James's voice cracked as he tried to explain further, but Clara's mind was already in overdrive. She tried to steady her breath, but the shaking of her hands betrayed her. The man she had married, the man she had envisioned a future with, had been nothing but a stranger. All the plans they had made together, the family, the life of giving back, the promise to be there for each other through thick and thin, had been a dream she'd built on lies. Clara felt sick to her stomach. How many people had James deceived? How many lives had he touched with his story, only to manipulate them for his own gain? She had never known him to be cruel, but the extent of his deception made her question everything. Was he truly the man she had fallen in love with? Or was he merely a projection of her own desires? A creation of the man he had wanted her to see? She stood up abruptly, her mind racing. "You've lied to me, James. You've lied to everyone. This isn't just about us. You've taken advantage of people's trust, their kindness, and I've been a part of it." Her voice shook with emotion, but her words were sharp, cutting through the silence between them. James didn't respond. Right away and in the stillness, Clara felt the full weight of what had just been revealed. The man she had once seen as her equal, her partner in life, had turned out to be a stranger, a man who had used her to further his own agenda. The sadness Clara felt was overwhelming, but the anger was what stayed with her, simmering just beneath the surface. She had trusted James with her heart, and he had taken that trust and shattered it. The pain she felt was not just from the lies, but from the realization that the person she thought she had known so intimately was nothing like she had imagined. "I can't believe this," Clara whispered, almost to herself. "I can't believe you've done this to me." The tears finally began to fall, but they were not just tears of heartbreak. They were tears of betrayal, of disillusionment, of realizing that everything she had thought was real was now reduced to dust. The future. She had imagined the life she had planned with James was now a broken dream. James didn't speak. He simply sat there, his hands trembling on the armrests of his chair, his face filled with guilt and shame. It was clear to Clara that he was genuinely remorseful, but the damage had already been done. His apology, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't erase the years of lies, nor could it undo the pain he had caused. Clara stood there in the darkened garden, the weight of his confession pressing on her chest. She knew that in this moment everything had changed. The man she thought she had married was no longer the person she had thought he was, and she would have to find a way to pick up the pieces of her broken heart, no matter how impossible that seemed. The silence between Clara and James stretched, heavy and suffocating. Clara's heart felt as though it had shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces, each one a reflection of a lie that James had crafted. She stood still, her mind numb, not knowing what to say or how to even begin processing the truth that had just been revealed. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with her deepest vulnerabilities, had been deceiving her from the very beginning. Her wedding day, the day she had dreamed of her entire life, had become a cruel mockery of everything she had believed in. James, in his wheelchair, looked down at the ground, his face contorted with guilt. "Clara, I know I can't undo what I've done. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I need you to understand that I never meant for it to get this far. I never meant to hurt you. I was just so scared of facing the truth." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She had cried too much already. The numbness was overtaking her, and the more James spoke, the more distant he seemed. His words, once comforting and reassuring, now felt empty and hollow. How could he claim to be scared when his lies had affected so many people? How many others had fallen victim to his manipulation just as she had? "I don't even know who you are anymore," Clara whispered, the pain in her voice unmistakable. "You've built an entire life on lies. How could I have been so blind? How could I not have seen through it? You weren't just hiding your past from me. You were hiding your true self." James's eyes were full of remorse, but his apology felt like a poor excuse for the years of deceit. He had lied not only to her, but to the people who had trusted him, supported him, and helped him build a life. Clara couldn't help but wonder how many other people had been deceived by his carefully constructed facade, how many had been used in the same way she had. As the weight of his confession sank deeper, Clara's mind began to race. She could feel the anger bubbling up from within her, the anger that had been suppressed since the moment he had first told her the truth. Her heart was torn between wanting to leave him immediately and wanting to understand why he had done this in the first place. She thought about their plans for the future, the house they were going to buy, the children they dreamed of raising, the life they had envisioned together. It all seemed so irrelevant now, so utterly broken. "I don't even know where to begin with this," Clara said, her voice breaking as she turned away from him and paced slowly in the garden. "How do I even process this? Everything we've talked about, everything we've built. It's all a lie. I don't know if I can trust you anymore, and I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." James didn't move. His silence spoke volumes. He was broken, crushed by the weight of what he had done, and he knew there was nothing he could say to undo the harm. Clara's words were like a punch to his gut, and he felt the suffocating pressure of guilt tightening around his chest. He had hoped that his confession would be the first step toward making things right, but deep down, he knew it was already too late. The damage had been done, and Clara's trust, once shattered, could never be fully repaired. The conversation they had was a painful one, but it was also necessary. Clara needed to understand the full scope of James's deception, to process the reality of how deeply he had manipulated her. She needed answers, though she wasn't sure if they could ever provide any comfort. He had used her trust, her compassion, to further his own agenda, and that truth left her reeling. James continued to apologize, but Clara knew it didn't matter. The apology was hollow, because the lies were too deep, too ingrained. The shock of the situation had numbed her to the core, but as the minutes passed, the sharp edge of betrayal began to cut through the fog. The man she had married, the man she had loved, had not only been a stranger to her but also a criminal. His lies had gone beyond personal deceit. They had been part of a larger scheme. James had been involved in an underground network of fraudsters, people who preyed on others' sympathy and manipulated them into providing financial support. He had used his fabricated story to gain access to charities, donors, and vulnerable people, all while building a life for himself that was based on the suffering of others. It was a betrayal on a scale that Clara couldn't have imagined. In the weeks that followed, the truth unraveled even further. Clara, now painfully aware of the depth of James's deception, contacted the authorities. The police investigated his involvement in the fraudulent schemes, and it wasn't long before other victims came forward. The scope of James's manipulations was vast, and the damage he had caused stretched far beyond Clara's own heartbreak.